My name is Mike Roach, and I teach at Eisenhower Junior High, and my son Ashton is on the autism spectrum.
My name is Linda Castile. I am a speech and language therapist in Granite School District, and I have a son who is on the autism spectrum.
My name is Blair Lyon. I work for the Salt Lake City School District. I teach elementary music, and I have 2 children on the spectrum.
My name is Andrew Anthony, and I'm a junior high teacher for Granite School District, and I have a daughter who has Asperger's.
Autism. There is no developmental disability that is garnering as much international attention or affecting as many people as autism. There are few teachers who have not had personal or professional connections to students with this disorder. Autism and Asperger syndrome, 2 of the conditions on the autism spectrum, are pervasive developmental disorders, meaning that they affect typical development and growth pattern and are pervasive or all-encompassing. And indeed, that is the case. Differences in individuals with autism spectrum disorders originate in the early development of the brain and result in varied patterns of skill acquisition as the child grows. Typically developing children acquire skills along a predictable trajectory in the areas of cognitive development, communication skills, motor skills, social competence, and sensory processing. But the developmental trajectory for students on the autism spectrum is uneven. Some skills may develop more rapidly than normal. Children may have unusually strong visual and memory skills, perhaps resulting in learning to read words at an early age. But some skills we take for granted, skills that we previously may have given little thought to, develop more slowly or even fail to develop in children on the autism spectrum. These may include the innate drive for social engagement, the capacity to decipher nonverbal messages, the ability to take the perspective of another person or to predict what another person is likely to do. Let's imagine 2 young children. One responds to his name before he is 12 months old, desires attention, attends to people's eyes, and can shift his attention between sounds coming from different directions. He generally prefers people over objects and is naturally hardwired to pick up on social information. He will lead and point to draw the attention of others to what interests him. He will naturally imitate the actions of others. He will soon learn that people have different perspectives, and he will learn to regulate his actions accordingly. He will be able to anticipate the actions of others and predict what will happen in his environment. He will naturally learn to moderate sensory input and process information from several sources, such as vision and auditory, at once. It's a different story for the child who has an autism spectrum disorder. He may not respond to his name. He may fixate his attention on one thing for long periods of time. He might prefer unusual play with objects to interacting with people. When he looks at faces, he may focus on the mouth rather than the eyes. He may not attend to social information and may not process speech effectively. In many instances, he may over-respond or under-respond to sensory stimuli and may not process information from different senses simultaneously. He may focus solely on details and not be able to see the big picture in events around him. He will not spontaneously imitate the actions of others. This child may not be able to understand that other people have different perspectives and feelings from his. Without sensing those perspectives and emotions, he may not regulate his behavior based on how people respond to him or be able to anticipate and predict how they will act. These differences may result in his living in an internal world of high stress and anxiety. As these children grow, they may look alike, they may both have apparently typical language and normal IQs, but the trajectories of their neurobiological development will be miles apart. As these 2 children enter the educational system, many of our old assumptions may not hold true. While we assume the first student can create written composition, develop handwriting skills, and understand abstractions on a level commensurate with his IQ, or be able to comprehend literature equally as well as he can decode words, we may make no such assumptions of the student with an autism spectrum disorder. Behaviors that we might label as rude, self-centered, defiant, uninterested, disorganized, immature, or even spoiled in the first child might be manifestations of autism in the second. Our challenge is to understand the outward behaviors that are characteristic of autism spectrum disorders, support the student and his family in overcoming the obstacles they may present, and all the while maintain the same high expectations we have for all of our students.
When we come to understand the different ways that children on the autism spectrum learn, and when we make necessary changes to the instructional environment and our teaching styles, these kids can make incredible educational gains. When a typically developing student exhibits a skill, like reading, we can usually safely assume that he or she has already mastered a set of prerequisite skills that allow him or her to demonstrate that skill, for example, decoding skills. This is not a safe assumption to make with students on the autism spectrum. As many of you know, the graphic that's used to represent the autism awareness movement is the puzzle piece. A former graduate student of mine pointed out to me once how this is an appropriate symbol because in many ways it really represents the way that most students with autism learn. Rather than learning in a linear way, they learn a piece here, a piece there, like putting together a puzzle. While savant-level skills like the genius-level mathematical abilities demonstrated by individuals like Kim Peek, who was the inspiration for Rain Man, are very rare, many students with autism spectrum disorders demonstrate exceptional skills in one or more specific areas. Their skills in these areas of great strength are often beyond those of their typically developing age peers. While it's certainly important to acknowledge these areas of strength, in order for students to be as independent and fully included as we want them to be, we must work hard to shore up the areas of weakness. By developing academic interventions to build on student strengths and remediate weaknesses, we can help these students achieve educational success.
My name is Claudia Bigler. I'm a choir teacher at Box Elder High School in Brigham City, Utah. I have a grandson, 8 years old, who is autistic.
My name is Catherine Robinson. I teach at Granite School District, Westlake Junior High, 7th grade science and biology. I have twin autistic sons.
My name is Rena Curl. I teach at Hurricane Middle School in Hurricane, Utah, and I have a child in the autism spectrum.
Well, if I saw a new teacher in the elevator and they were had some apprehension about having a child with autism in their class, I would say, oh, what a lucky experience you have. This is a great opportunity for you to really test your teaching skills and to see what you're made of.
When I talk with other teachers about having autistic children in their classroom, the number one piece of advice I give them is to not let the labels scare you away. That they are slightly different, but not totally different from every other student that you have, and that good teaching practices for your normal students will be good teaching practices with your autistic students.
I would say to be very creative in your approaches with teaching your autistic students.
I think what people need to know about children on the autism spectrum is it really is about the relationship with the educator to the child. That a child on the autism spectrum wants to know why. They have to do something, they want to understand why it's important and why they should think it's important.
Don't be scared. You can do it. It's going to take a while to get them where you want them to be, but you can do it. I would say, number one, use your resources. Use your parents or guardians. Use the resources in the school and in the district.
I will say this, you do need to prepare yourself and that you don't react.
I would say listen to them. Make sure they know that they're important and what they have to say is important, and their ideas are listened to and validated, because they really love that, they want that.
We have just completed a long-term longitudinal study at the University of Utah with Bill McMahon and Megan Farley, looking at how high-functioning autistic individuals do as adults. And what we found is this, and it's pretty primary. What we found is that if you drop your expectation level for a child with autism, they will drop to that level. If we don't expect the basic standard independence that we find in other children, children with autism seem to stagnate and do not develop basic skills that will help them in the long run. What we found out from our research longitudinally, looking at children with autism grown up, some of them in their 40s now, is that there were some things that really mattered for their adjustment. One was basically having high expectations for what we would call self-help or adaptive skills. If an autistic individual was to do well as an adult, the more independent they were in these skills, the better they adjusted, the better they did with the community. If the basic standard skills such as dressing and feeding and taking care of yourself and integrating with the community was low, these individuals tended not to do nearly as well. It puts a large burden on them and the family. So basic high expectations for their self-help and adaptive behaviors made a huge difference for these individuals.
In terms of maintaining high expectations for students, and we have to apply this to our son at home as well, we try to challenge our son, and I try to challenge my students in forms of, you have done this already. Look at how far you have come. Let's see if we can take it another step further. And so I have to be ahead of them a step or two in order to help them go a step farther.
I think as far as what expectations you should have for any student is you should have the same expectations. You may take a different way to get them there. There are accommodations that are in place to get them to your expectation, but you should never have a lower expectation for any student because they are autistic, because they are ESL, because they are low income, etc., etc. The expectations are the same. You just have different roads to get them there.
You absolutely have to have the same expectations. Students, regardless of who they are, of any disabilities that they may have, whether they're autistic, they're blind, they're deaf, whatever, they're at school to learn and to progress and to improve themselves. And if you don't hold them to a high standard, then you're wasting their time and you're wasting your time, frankly.
In order for them to be productive in life, we have to ask for the best that they can be.
But we also looked at the individuals themselves, and they have to have the expectation for them that autism is a challenge. It's not an excuse to meet the basic standard demands that we all meet every day. One of the things that really stood out is that high-functioning adults with autism knew they were different, and it made a huge difference if they looked at this as more of a challenge for integrating rather than being separate or different from others who are their age. It made a big difference. High expectations, both for the educators that interact with children with autism and the families that are supportive, makes a big difference on whether they will do well as adults many years from now.
My name is Lizzie Smith. I teach at Parkside Elementary in the Murray School District. I have a brother with Asperger's and a nephew with PDD, which is pervasive development disorder.
My name is Kathy Homus, and I teach at Arcadia Elementary, Granite School District, 4th grade. I have had either a diagnosed autistic child in my classroom or an Asperger's child every year since I've taught.
My name is Linda Stewart, and I teach 2nd grade at Woods Cross Elementary in Davis County, Utah. And my connection to autism is that I have a former husband who has Asperger's syndrome, and I have taught several children over the years who have this particular disorder.
While these developmental differences affect students in many ways, they should not become insurmountable barriers to a satisfying and productive life. The symptoms of autism are challenges, not excuses. When teachers encounter concerns with students who are on the autism spectrum, there are 3 general approaches they can choose from. First, they can compensate for a weakness by maximizing a strength. Second, find an alternative means to accomplish the same result. And third, explicitly teach the skill that is missing. First, compensate for a weakness by maximizing a strength. While autism spectrum disorders are responsible for some social and academic challenges, The disorder may also result in some common strengths. Often these strengths can be used to compensate for a weakness. One striking example is using a visual processing strength to compensate for an auditory processing difficulty.
World-renowned animal scientist and autism self-advocate Temple Grandin said, "People on the autism-Asperger spectrum have uneven skills. Strengths in visual processing are very common among students with autism. Imagine going through a day without your calendar, your daily schedule, to-do list, phone contact list, or shopping list. These are all examples of visual supports which help us to have meaningful and productive days. Likewise, students benefit from similar visual supports. Examples include establishing social structure, physical structure, and academic structure. Physically arrange the space in your classroom to enhance student success. For example, provide clear physical and visual boundaries to clearly indicate what should happen in each area of the room. Students with autism spectrum disorders do best when their space is predictable, when they know where to hang their jackets, which desk is theirs, where they can obtain needed materials. Minimize visual and auditory distractions. Students with autism spectrum disorders may focus better if their work areas are clutter and congestion-free. They may need special seating arrangements so they are not sitting beside distractions such as windows, doors, and certain students. Creating visual barriers such as a study carrel may help minimize some distractions. Having the daily schedule posted for students or personal schedules for individual students help them predict what will happen during the school day. These schedules can be broken down to smaller increments of time, such as for each period of the day. Work schedules provide students with concrete information about what work needs to be completed in a period of time. For example, during reading time, students may be required to do 4 work tasks. First, read pages 45 through 60. 2, write their names on the worksheet. 3, answer questions 1 through 5 on the worksheet. And 4, place the completed worksheet in the teacher's inbox. Work schedules should answer 4 specific questions. First, what work do I need to do? Second, how much work do I need to do? Third, when am I finished working? And fourth, what do I do next? Graphic organizers help students visualize complex relationships such as a sequence of events, a hierarchy, or a process. For example, a graphic organizer can be used to illustrate the 3 branches of the United States government. Including illustrations helps students understand the concept more fully. When you use visual structure in your classroom, you utilize the strengths of your students with autism spectrum disorders. This decreases the time you spend providing auditory instruction and correction, increases students' independence on their tasks, incorporates their need for routines, and emphasizes the concept of finished. Because visual structure is fixed, it will continue to be a support, whereas auditory input is soon lost or forgotten once it's spoken. Establishing and maintaining visual structure will help your students with autism spectrum disorders and will also provide support and organization to the other students you teach.
I mean, lecturing has its place, but you've got to do it in small doses. You've got to keep them moving, really. The second that you lose their interest, they can be gone for the rest of the period.
I think some of the things that I do visually with autistic students, one is I like to put in lots of pictures with my lessons. That helps not only autistic students, but ESL students and special needs students. I like to have, if I have vocabulary, I like to have pictures that go up along with the vocabulary words. And also having PowerPoints, things like that, to where a student can then go over that again and again so that they're able to learn at their pace.
Autism spectrum students like routine, and they like to know what's going to happen. If you know something's going to happen and you let them know it's going to happen in advance, it's more likely that they'll make a successful attempt to that's coming up.
A lot of times in the home, we relate things that they're trying to learn with a movie that they might have seen on television, because they have to almost experience things to understand it, and sometimes they can get that experience through a movie. So if there's a way you can say, remember that movie and what those people did, that's what this is about, and they'll go, oh. So that helps. If you can, show a picture, if you can relate it to something in their life, they'll understand the concept better.
Second, find an alternative means to accomplish the same result. All teachers who work with diverse student populations understand the importance of being creative and flexible in presenting information, making assignments, and assessing subject mastery. Teachers who work with students on the spectrum will find means to these ends that bypass autism spectrum challenges. A study was conducted at Kennedy Krieger Institute in Maryland with 26 kids. They were ages 8 to 12. 13 of the kids were on the autism spectrum. They had high-functioning autism. And 13 were kids with neurotypical development. They were taught a series of finger taps in which they were required to touch their thumbs to their forefingers, middle fingers, ring fingers, and little fingers, and while they were performing this exercise, their brain activity was measured using a functional MRI. What the researchers found was that during the exercise, the regions of the brain associated with movement showed increased activity in both groups of kids. In fact, there was a little more activity in that part of the brain with the kids on the spectrum. But the part of the brain, the part of the cerebellum in particular, that stores motor activity and essentially commits it to memory, did not have as much increased activity in the group of kids on the autism spectrum. These findings may mean that kids with AS don't transfer motor activities from the region of the brain that directs deliberate execution of a motor task over to the cerebellum, where motor skills become automatic or habituated, requiring no forethought. So this would tell us a great deal about why handwriting seems very, very laborious to some kids. Cleric speed, then, or the rate at which kids perform handwriting, can be affected as well. Adults often have a somewhat rigid expectation of how much written work should be assigned. So it can be kind of difficult to adjust our ideas about the level of production that we want to see, especially in a school setting. Parents and educators need to be flexible about this and work with individual kids in adjusting requirements in this area. I think that we can address this issue in a lot of simple ways in classroom settings. We can get kids on keyboards as early as kindergarten or first grade. And since we know that keyboards are the vehicle by which we all do the majority of our communicating nowadays, it makes a lot of sense to have kids be able to access this vital tool as early as possible. And once kids begin to master keyboarding basics, we need to allow them to produce their classwork and their homework on a computer whenever that's possible. Allowing other kids to take notes and record class and homework assignments for kids with AS is another way to make a simple adjustment in the classroom. One simple solution is to provide NCR paper in the class and assign a peer to use it to take notes or copy assignments from the board on a daily basis. The peer then tears off the top sheet, hands it to his partner with Asperger syndrome, and everyone has a copy of the information. This is easy and it's low tech. We also need to rethink the traditional approaches to teaching handwriting and the requirement for lots of practice of this skill. In contrast to other academic tasks, it truly does not appear to improve with practice. And again, this may be related to the fact that with some kids, the brain doesn't seem to store some types of motor function in the cerebellum. If that is the case, no matter how much practice is required, the skill will not become automated or more fluent.
Teaching some of their vocabulary words sometimes or some of the content so that when they get to it they are more aware of what they're learning, because sometimes I think it goes over their heads when they don't have some preconceived notions of what to expect. A lot of times in helping a student understand the curriculum, especially with autistic students, they need a lot of repetition. And so if you can repeat it in different ways, more creative ways, act it out, that kind of thing, the more creative you can be with teaching them the content in your curriculum, the better off they are going to be and the more they are going to learn.
Basically, when we study for tests, if I know they know the answer because they've previously given it to me, I try to ask it in a different way. It's the same thing. Sometimes they just don't understand the way you ask it.
I have actually done a lot in terms of helping the students find keywords in their questions for testing. Sometimes the students have a real difficult time trying to figure out what the question is asking simply because they don't understand the question words themselves. Key question word might be when. When do you eat your breakfast? What is the key question word? It's when. How are you going to answer that? You have to give me a time frame. I eat my breakfast in the morning when I get out of bed.
Third, explicitly teach the skill that is missing. Sometimes the teacher will decide that a missing skill needs to be directly taught.
Students with Asperger's often lack necessary skills to be successful in social settings. And if you think about it, school is one big social setting. A student's chronic social failures can trigger anxiety and depression, and those failures are sometimes baffling to us in the neurotypical world. We may think the student is being rude, but in reality, that student is in a chronic state of confusion regarding what to do, how to do it, how to react, and perhaps why he has to write in his journal again. I already did it yesterday, or predict what would happen next. How would I know what would happen next? I haven't read the story yet. There is frustration and fear, and it's amplified, and it occurs from a variety of perspectives. From the teacher's perspective, the parents, the peers, and the student himself, they all have this level of misunderstanding and fear. And when adults and teachers don't understand why that kid who seems to be really smart and gets really good grades, why that kid acts and reacts in a socially inappropriate or immature manner. I hear people say, he acts weird, or he has no social skills. Yes, he has Asperger's. I hear people say, he is doing that on purpose. No, he has Asperger's. We may need to specifically teach a student how to observe a peer's or a teacher's nonverbal behavior and decide what it means and how to react to it. Typical peers already know how to do this. We may need to specifically teach social cognition, how to take a different perspective or recognize the perspective of someone else. The world can be really narrow and restricted and confusing and scary if you don't have the ability to figure out what someone else is thinking and predict their behavior. Typical peers already know how to do this. We may need to specifically teach the hidden curriculum, things that the cool kids are already savvy about, like how to respond to unfriendly teasing, how to know when it's time to stop talking about your favorite thing, how to not be the rules police, how to be flexible with a schedule change or a change on the school lunch menu. We need to teach that if the schedule changes, the person who created that schedule in the first place is not a liar. We need to specifically teach that idioms and metaphors do not mean exactly what they say. For example, if someone says, "See you later, alligator," he is not calling you a reptile. For a concrete thinker, idioms can be very disconcerting. With these kids, when they seem rude or exhibit some type of social behavior or a disruptive behavior, we need to ask ourselves, what is it about this social situation does this kid not understand? When he fails, we know we need to teach what he is missing. He may need to be specifically taught the difference between my space and your space, or how to recognize when the teacher has had it. You know, the other kids know because they recognize the look. He may need to be taught that other people get to talk, when and where to hum, that you can stand closer to someone when you are walking in a line than when you are talking face to face, that the rules in math class are the same as the rules in English class, or that they're not the same. Students with Asperger syndrome need specific and direct teaching of the seemingly obvious. If we as adults can understand the difference between won't do and can't do, we can add value, understanding, acceptance, and validity to a student who is worried or anxious, confused, probably teased, and desperately needing our understanding and effective intervention.
I think, first off, with helping students to attend to your curriculum, because there is a tendency, even more than other students, to want to go off on tangents. To first off, explain the purpose for the assignment. You have to learn this because, and this is why you are doing this. And then give them the option to go off on whatever tangent there is once their assignment has been completed. So hold it out as a carrot to them. Once you have done my assignment, then you can go explore this little area that you're interested in. When I first started, I had a very wise teacher that told me that arguing with a junior high student was like mud wrestling a pig. You both get dirty and the pig enjoys it. I found that's the same arguing with an autistic student. You won't win, they'll enjoy it, and you'll ruin your day, so don't even bother.
With my daughter, we've had some adventures where she's been very outspoken and very blunt because one of the filters that she's missing is a diplomacy filter. And we've had to teach her not to be so abrupt with people, not to be so rude and undiplomatic.
The other behavior thing that we've worked on a lot is eye contact, because I know it's extremely important for teachers. They don't like kids who drop their head. And so we've worked on a lot of eye contact and simply saying, hello, good morning, thank you, excuse me. I said, you don't have to do long conversations, but look them in the eye and say thank you.
I think anymore we have to explicitly teach social rules in almost any class. Lots of students are no longer coming from traditional two-parent nuclear families. Lots of students come in without really being socialized to what to do in a classroom. And so the first several weeks of school, you're spending a lot of time teaching the ground rules, the regulations, this is how you do these things. And then you always follow that up throughout the year and reinforce that. And it's not just the autistic students that are needing that, it's lots of students that are needing that. So I always feel it's time well spent in your classroom to get those students to know how you expect them to behave.
The importance of the teacher-student relationship is perhaps the most important thing, because if they don't feel love from you, if they don't feel they're accepted, if they don't feel that there's connection there, maybe it's only one way, you to them, as far as you're concerned, but they have to feel that or else you're not going to make any progress.
Sometimes we've had to work on them getting help, but it's still very hard for them, because if they don't feel comfortable with the teacher, they still might not raise their hand. An example happened last year when they passed out a test. There was one last test, Sean didn't get the test, and the teacher did not pick up on the fact that he didn't have a test, and he didn't tell her. 15 minutes into the test, she finally realized it. But this teacher was just so fabulous that she just calmly said, here's your test, work it, and then she gave him extra time.
If you don't have a good relationship with your student, learning is not taking place. It is absolutely vital that you have a caring relationship of trust.
You need to let them know that you care. And I again know that you have 200 students or 35 or whatever's in your class, but they need to know that they're safe with you.
Teacher-student relationships can be real tricky, because I know sometimes the student, the autistic student, is a real difficult one to deal with. As long as you take the time to figure out why a student behaves the way they do, especially an autistic student, and then try and figure out a way to help them act differently or behave differently, your classroom is going to run smoother. The problem being, sometimes autistic students are not real adept at coming to you and saying, this child is bothering me, or I don't understand this concept. So you're going to have to take the initiative, or have a peer tutor take the initiative and come and say to the student, Are you understanding this concept? If you're not understanding this concept, let me help you.
I'll never quit on you if you don't quit trying. So you need to choose to learn. If you'll choose to learn and stick with me, we'll make it happen.
We're going to be seeing more and more of them. It's a situation that is growing in our society, and so we need to learn how to best help them to excel, how to best become what they should become in our society.
Bottom line, get to know the student, and you're going to do that partly by talking to the student the best that you can. Of course, time is always a premium in the classroom. It's difficult to do that. You talk to the child, get to know the child, and talk to the parents. That is paramount.
Well, we've tried to encourage any of the talents and abilities that they have, and work on developing those, and that gives them a little more confidence in other areas too.
You go to other teachers, talk to them. You're going to get ideas, you're going to get suggestions, you're going to get things that work, and you're going to find out what doesn't work.
They are so full of life, and they're so interested, and I think all of us see a little bit of ourselves in those students because there's no cloaking mechanism. There's nothing to hide what they are feeling, and so we can look at them and say, wow, I remember when I was that excited. And I think it's a wonderful opportunity for us as teachers to be able to teach students with these abilities.